how bad was it? Apparently, the president's stops in El Paso and Dayton, two communities he vowed to help heal, were so off-key, the attacks on local leaders so jarring, the barrage of angry tweets at the media and local leaders so startling that even Trump's own White House acknowledged the trip was a debacle. New York Times White House reporter Maggie Haberman on her reporting earlier today.
Does the White House think this visit went well, Maggie? Do you have any sense?
They don't. No.
If they're waking up this morning happy about this?
Most people, well, they would, I suspect, not say that publicly, will privately admit that yesterday was something of a debacle, that these were not the headlines that they wanted to see. They wanted him to go in and behave differently. The goal was to have him go in and get out with making as little news as possible. He actually has done that in the past. He did it after Pittsburgh, where there was also controversy. After the synagogue shooting there, he was much more able to sort of stay calm. Yesterday, he couldn't stop watching television news where Democratic candidates were attacking him, and this is part of the process.
These were the headlines that underscored Maggie's reporting. From the New York Times, Trump uses a day of healing to deepen the nation's divisions. From the Washington Post, Trump attacks local leaders as he visits two cities grieving from mass shootings. And the LA Times with this one, Trump visits shooting victims in Dayton and El Paso and lashes out at his critics. The Washington Post adds this, quote, none of the 8 victims of the El Paso mass shooting still being treated at University Medical Center agreed to meet with President Trump when he visited on Wednesday. The president's attempts at consoling communities in pain paling in comparison to some of the men and women who seek to replace him. In an emotional encounter, El Paso native Beto O'Rourke yesterday comforted an anguished member of his community. Here's that moment.
Talk to me.
It's too much. El Paso was great. I don't know why this Joan is doing this to us.
It's all right. Come here. Come here, man.
Display of raw humanity. Beto O'Rourke then offering the grieving man his contact information and telling him to reach out if he needs help. O'Rourke wasn't the only person who seemed to have an easier time touching the nation's raw nerves and speaking to the bravery of the victims with more eloquence than the president.
We're here this morning in the wake of yet another act of hatred in America. But I come here today because of love.
Right now, we have to decide what kind of nation we're going to become.
We can't go on like this. I was part of what I feel like was the first generation where school shootings were routine. Now we've seen a second. Are we really going to allow there to be a third?
Those bullets are not distinguishing between a Republican and a Democrat. And those children who are going to school every day in fear of some gunman roaming the halls of their school could care less if you are a Democrat or a Republican.
Ladies and gentlemen, the American people may be running out of tears, but I pray they're not running out of will. A will to do something about where we are. We don't need thoughts and prayers out of Washington. What we need is strength and some resolve that we haven't seen yet.
The president's shortcomings, the president's abnormalities, frankly speaking, made all the starker by the very public displays of leadership and humanity from the men and women seeking to replace him. That's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. From the New York Times, White House correspondent Annie Carney. Charlie Sykes is the editor-in-chief of the conservative news and opinion website, The Bulwark. With us at the table, Rick Stengel, former managing editor for Time Magazine, Karine Jean-Pierre, chief public affairs officer for MoveOn.org, plus political reporter for the New York Times, Nick Confessori's back. Lucky for us, each and every one of them, MSNBC contributors. Annie Carney, I stopped in my tracks when I saw Maggie Haberman report early this morning on another network that even some of her sources inside the White House could acknowledge that yesterday was a debacle.
Yeah, I think her reporting is accurate. I think that President Trump wasn't particularly happy with how it went, and the intention here at the outset was to get him in and out of both of these cities quickly and privately. That's why the aides limited the press pool's access to the hospitals where he visited and hoped to make this at best, not something that generated negative headlines. But the president was upset with the coverage, upset with how it unfolded in real time, that these heartwarming scenes he described behind the scenes weren't seen by reporters. So I don't think anyone was happy on either end of it. And another concern I'm hearing is that, this election, we are in an election season. If you're looking at this politically, this election is going to be decided by a lot of voters who don't like him personally, and voters who will have to choose the economy and the gains he's giving over their personal distaste for the president. And moments like this concern aides who think that, this will push them over the edge and say, I just don't like this person.
Charlie, on the need for speed, here's what the White House is afraid of. Here's Donald Trump inside the hospital yesterday.
I was here 3 months ago. We made a speech, and we had what was the name of the arena? That place was packed, right?
I was front row.
Right? The judges have respected you.
I was front row.
What was the name?
I was front row in there.
He was in the front row. Come here, man. That was some crowd.
Thank you.
And we had twice the number outside. And then you had this crazy Beto. Beto had like 400 people in a parking lot. They said his crowd was wonderful.
Because, Charlie, if you're at a hospital at someone's bedside, it's all about the size of your overflow crowd. I mean, to borrow an expression from Beto, WTF.
Yeah, there are events that will raise the stature of a president. There have been presidents who have really risen to the occasion, and then there are presidents who are exposed by the occasion. And this was certainly an exposed moment. But again, I mean, this is Donald Trump, and we've gotten to know him, and even though it seems familiar, but he wants to be the bride at every wedding, he wants to be the corpse at every funeral, he wants to be the baby at every christening, and apparently he wants to be the rock star at every trauma center as well. The fact that they would put out this promotional video, the fact that they would tweet out, about how he was this rock star, how totally vulgar and inappropriate the entire thing was. But once again, it was Donald Trump, the essence of this man, that was really on display and exposed by this national tragedy.
Karine, I want to dig into the political vulnerabilities exposed, because I agree with everything Annie and Charlie have said. And I think Annie's right that the group of people that the White House has to worry about when, as Charlie said, Donald Trump is exposed, just being himself. That's who he is. He goes to a hospital ostensibly to comfort people and is talking about the size of his overflow crowds. And I've aired President Obama's moment singing Amazing Grace. I think we have that footage again. My old boss, George W. Bush, after 9/11, took it upon himself to represent all Americans at a moment of shock and horror. Donald Trump doesn't fail trying. He just fails.
Yeah, it's almost as if that very important chip that's needed for the characterization of a president, right? The care, the heart that we've seen from every president that you just mentioned, whether it's Republican or a Democrat, he's missing it. He doesn't have it. And he doesn't even try. The shallowness, the tone deafness, he will never be able to rise to the occasion because he cannot, and he only cares about Donald Trump. And the thing about this week that I found that was really interesting is you actually saw him flailing, right? You saw him out there just flailing about. And the reason why is because all the Democratic candidates were on one accord. Right?
Right. That's the variable. Right. I want to ask you, but I want to follow up with you because Maggie Haberman in an interview points to Pittsburgh as being an example of how, I mean, the bar's incredibly low, but I suppose her point was that he met the incredibly low bar we have for him. The variable is, as you say, the Democrats running to replace him, they have a stage now, and they are all singing from one song sheet. You have Beto O'Rourke and Elizabeth Warren both saying yesterday they believe Donald Trump is a white supremacist.
And they're showing something that we haven't seen in 3 years, which is leadership. Right? We have not seen that. So you saw that from Cory Booker. You saw that from Joe Biden. You certainly have seen that time and time again this week from Beto O'Rourke. That clip that you showed of him just holding that man who's crying, right? Because we have to understand there is a community out there, the Latin community, the immigrant community, that is not being represented by this president. They're being attacked by this president. And so it's very, very real. And there's another thing, too. I think the media has been on one accord as well, which is calling out this cruelty, which is making sure that we have space. People can go on television and talk about what's happening. And so when you have that, when you have the media doing its job, when you have Democrats on one accord, then you see the realness of this president, the lack. We have a small man in the White House, and we see it over and over again. And we know this. We know this. It's just that this week, something about this week has helped us really magnify that.
You know, Nick, I've had this sort of thought process this week because I think you see suffering and you see pain and you try to walk in their shoes, right? I mean, we have kids. We have to go back to school shopping for the sorts of things the moms and dads at Walmart were looking for on that day. They went in for pencils and backpacks and refrigerated lunch boxes, and some of them lost their lives. So it's this incredibly relatable thing. They were just, I mean, in a former counterterror official said to me, it's the textbook definition of terrorism. You know, that if as many people died in Iraq in roadside bombings as have died in mass shootings, you know, we switched policies in Iraq. We went to the surge based on a military strategy that was costing us around the same number of lives. We've now lost more.
It's true. Politically, gun violence is the one issue that seems exempt from the usual forces of public opinion, of movement, of policy makings. It is simply frozen for reasons that we're all familiar with. You know, I agree with Karine that yes, it's true. He's missing some piece of machinery. In fact, I remember using almost the exact same language in the wake of the Florida hurricane at this table. But on top of that, he has deliberately chosen a strategy for his re-election campaign. His strategy is brown people are coming to steal your country and your stuff. I'm not even exaggerating. He's run 2,000 ads on Facebook with invasion in them about the southern border. That's his campaign strategy. He is banking on getting people afraid. How can a person who's decided that is their best bet to re-election truly inhabit, even in a performative way, the consoler role that almost any other politician would? This is not a campaign that's going to be about tax cuts and growing the economy. It's a campaign about fear.
I want to pick up on Karine's thread because she made a point about the media that's important. Beto O'Rourke made this point at the beginning of the week when he had that colorful quote, and he said he's so sick of the media asking questions they know the answer to. Nick and Annie's colleague, Peter Baker, wrote a piece on the front page of the Sunday paper, I think it's 3 weeks ago now, when Donald Trump declared war on the squad. And what Peter, I think it was better language than I'm going to be able to recall, but basically that he woke up in the morning and threw a match and a bunch of gasoline on the nation's racial tensions. People in El Paso, a lot of people that have come on this program this week, and certainly if you were an algorithm that looked for intersections of a killer's manifesto and Donald Trump's Twitter feed, whole lot of connections there between Donald Trump's language of an invasion of immigrants and the killer's screed.
That was your ding, 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 ding line.
Right. If I were an algorithm, which someone suggested I go as an algorithm for Halloween.
You can do better than that. I was very struck by the Beto O'Rourke line, and I've been frustrated myself as a longtime journalist that journalists are asking questions they know the answers to because they don't know any other questions to ask, right? It's like, if Donald Trump had said X, would that have changed things? Well, you know he's never going to say X. It's very frustrating, and it's something we've all experienced being around this table for months and years now, is how do you process Trump from a journalistic perspective? You can't ask the conventional questions because people already know the answers to them. And I think it's been frustrating. I don't think we've come up with a way to cover him. I mean, to your point, there has been a kind of journalistic consensus that alienates him because he hates this idea that there's a consensus against him. But having a journalistic consensus is also not necessarily a good thing for journalism either. Annie
Karni, let me let you jump in on this because you go about the business of trying to cover this White House and you do it better than just about anybody on that beat. Your thoughts?
Well, I think that what we saw unfold here, to some extent is shocking, and to some extent is exactly how a lot of people predicted this would play out. The events of the past 24 hours just made it more clear that the teleprompter speech he gave on Monday, where he condemned white nationalism outright, was a line he read and was not where his heart is. We didn't hear any of that language echoed anywhere in his comments yesterday, especially in El Paso, where that was where the shooter did seem to be channeling some of Trump's language as his motivation. No reference to that again. And it was just more starkly on display that every time a tragedy like this happens, we can have one moment of where he says the right thing, and then his real self appears and we see where his head is really at. And I think that is the challenge of covering Trump. When he does say the right thing, when he does say the words of condemning white nationalism, we cover those words, and do we think that it matters that he said them at all? In some sense, it still does matter that he said them. In some sense, does he undercut it the next day? It's a question that we deal with all the time here.
Charlie Sykes, he undercut it so completely and so quickly that you've now got two of the Democrats that I've counted running for president calling him a white supremacist. Here's Elizabeth Warren.
So I was asked the question and I gave an honest answer. He's a man who cozies up to the white supremacists. He calls them fine fellows. He's talked about trying to get brown people and black people out of this country. He's talked about shithole countries. This is what he's done, the wink and a nod. And he can't have it both ways. He can't keep trying to stir this up, give aid and comfort, be embraced by the white supremacists, and then say, oh, but not me. No, he's responsible. He's the president of the United States.
Charlie, that was Elizabeth Warren explaining her response to the New York Times, in which she calls Trump a white supremacist.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who was surprised by the fact that the president was going to undermine his own message just hasn't been paying any attention. You know, he can read the right words, but teleprompter Trump is not the same as rally and Twitter Trump. But and going back to Nick's point here, look, you know, this is a president who is incapable of rallying the nation around the opposition to white nationalist terrorism because he just doesn't feel it. You know, he has made a calculated decision that he's going to run on fear of the other, fear of the caravan, fear of the Hispanic invasion, of the infestation of our cities. This is what he is doing. This is his message. And as a result, you try to compare these presidential moments, Ronald Reagan after the Challenger disaster, George W. Bush after 9/11, Barack Obama after the shootings in Charlotte, and then you compare that to Donald Trump yesterday. What's missing? What's missing is passion, which is a commitment, and a sense that he actually sees this as a real problem. And again, whatever he says that is written for him, probably has an expiration date of less than 24 hours. And again, we saw that on display this week.
Karine, where are we if we've now got two Democrats, in Elizabeth Warren's case, one of the front runners in this Democratic field, describing her opponent, the head of the Republican Party, the leader of this country, as a white supremacist? Beto O'Rourke made that accusation of Donald Trump during our hour in an interview with Jacob Sobroff. I posited that it might change the contours of this election. Do you think it's that dramatic? I haven't heard a contrast like that in a presidential contest ever.
Right. And so here's the thing, Nicole. In a few days, we are about to hit the second-year anniversary of Charlottesville, where a young woman, Heather Heyer, died fighting racism, right? She was an anti-racist, protester. And during that time, we saw the neo-Nazis, we saw David Duke, they were praising Donald Trump's name. And when white supremacists think that you are a white supremacist, that's a problem. And this is the president that they believe is a white supremacist, right? They believe that he is their savior. They believe that he got elected for them, and he emboldens them. And this is something that many of us, if you are a person of color living in this country and you saw what was going in 2016, you knew what was happening. You knew exactly who Donald Trump was. And you knew even the years before, 2011 with birtherism. This is not something that's new for many of us. It's just now finally being told and finally being said out loud, where no one feels like kind of, oh, I'm going to get, taken out for saying that word.
But
and that is just the reality that we're
Yeah.
in. We've been in this reality for a long time.
Go ahead, and then I have one more question.
But I think Nick's point is an important one. This is now deliberate. This is now a campaign strategy.
There's money behind it. He bought those ads on Facebook.
He may feel this way personally.
For a long time. I get it. He bought 2,000, he has 2,000 ads on Facebook. But this has been deliberate since 2011 when he decided he was going to jump into the political arena. This is not new.
Kareen's right. I mean, when doctors and nurses were heading to Africa to fight Ebola, he was for shutting down the borders to keep aid workers out. I mean, the xenophobia, the isolationism is the constant threat. And I guess my challenge, my question to all of you, my colleague Joe Scarborough has been really taking a hard line on Trump's donors. I mean, is that the next front of this? I mean, where do Democrats take this message, Kareen?
We're such in a really crazy time right now.
Yeah.
And it's hard to get through to people, right? And I get what folks are trying to do. They're trying to send a message like, it is not okay to support this guy. It is not okay. Look what he is doing.
Yeah.
Look at the awful, cruel policies. And I think it's a way to call people out and wake them up, right? And say, if you support him, this is what you are supporting. Now, I understand the issues and the problems of doing that, but I get the sentiment behind it.
The urgency.
The urgency of now. Absolutely.
I mean, look, part of the privilege of being a wealthy person is to be insulated to some extent from pressure, from public opinion. You can do what you want, and money buys power. What we are seeing now is that there are people who are going to go out there on the left and beyond who are going to say, look, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
You can't just say you support this president because you like some of his policies.
Because you like the tax cuts.
If you support him, you're getting the whole bundle. So decide if you're in favor of that. That's what we're going to see.
I think it's fair game. All right, go
And
ahead.
why? Remember, people boycotted apartheid products. Remember, years ago, you wouldn't buy stock or product from any company that supported apartheid South Africa. Why isn't there not that same thing with people who support Donald Trump and their products and their companies? And there has been with Equinox this past week.
Oh, God, I've got a lot of soul psychopaths. Annie Carney, let me give you the last word.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's nothing wrong boycotting SoulCycle and Equinox as you oppose Stephen Ross throwing a fundraiser for Trump is a totally legitimate way to express yourself. Economic boycotts are protected by the First Amendment. The Castro campaign's decision to publicize people who maxed out to Trump in San Antonio has been controversial, but it's public disclosure. Those names are public. The question for Democrats, though, is, Elizabeth Warren, Beto O'Rourke call Trump a white supremacist. But if you think back to 2016, Hillary Clinton did get in trouble when she referred to his supporters as deplorables. So I think that calling people who support Donald Trump white supremacists by association would actually be a very problematic place for Democrats to find themselves.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.